Good morning. I'd like to call this September 14th meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board to order at, I believe it is 10:34 a.m. I'm going to interject the first item of business. I would like to welcome our new appointee to the Camino Real Board. Marty Reyes, would you please stand and be recognized?
Thank you.
Well, we're excited to have her. She is a great voice and a good representative from the east side of El Paso, having served a very long time on the Isleta School Board, and she retired from that position, and I think she's going to bring a very good perspective to our board. Marty, thank you for being here with us today, even though you're not actually a seated member until our next meeting. We're looking forward to having you. Mr. Tejas, do we have anyone signed up for public comment this morning?
No one signed up today, sir.
Okay. Item number 3 will be the adoption of minutes for the CRRMA Special Board meeting of August 31st, 2016. Do I hear a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is approved. Item 4 is a presentation by the New Mexico Border Authority on the Santa Teresa International Rail Study. Mr. Tejas?
Yes, sir. Good morning. Raymond Tejas, Executive Director of the Camino Real RMA. Today we have with us actually former Mayor Bill Matisse, who is the Executive Director of the New Mexico Border Authority, and he's here to fill us in on the Santa Teresa International Rail Study that was recently completed. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Chairman Morty and the members of the authority, glad to be here, honored to be here. With just a little background about the New Mexico Border Authority. It started in 1992. It was a Franco Papin and a Pete Dominici idea with Charlie Crowder. And the Border Authority actually oversees the 3 ports of entry. We show interest in transportation and roads into Antelope Wells, Columbus, Palomas. We're proud to say that we have a $95 million U.S. Customs facility ready for construction in January of 2018. That will be built there. So that will really develop that port of entry. Santa Teresa has grown. It's right now doing a 41% increase in traffic at the Santa Teresa port of entry. And with that, we are proposing a rail project. And this is a very big binational regional project to bring Federmex up from Mexico, across at the Santa Teresa border, approximately 5 miles west of the current Pete Dominici highway. And that will interconnect with, hopefully, I say hopefully because right now they're passive participants. We're doing a study, and that would be Union Pacific and Burlington. And I think that would create a lot of import and export traffic, not only for the state of New Mexico and Chihuahua, but for the entire region. And I think it would develop your, what I call sister cities, the city of Sunland Park and other cities in the south, as well as Las Cruces, New Mexico. Thank you for your time. And I'll just introduce my partner since February 2015, HNTV. Eduardo Calvo has done a great job bringing the study to its first phase of completion, which will be October, and then we'll go into phase 2 and complete phase 3 and 4 with the NEPA and, of course, the presidential permitting process. Thank you for your time.
Mayor, thank you for being here with us today.
Good morning, Chairman. For the record, Eduardo Calvo with HNTB Corporation. Happy to be here. So as Mr. Matisse explained, we completed the feasibility phase of this project. This is a project that the whole idea is to build a bypass to the west of the metropolitan areas of Ciudad Juarez and El Paso to resolve a lot of the issues, a lot of the conflicts that we have right now currently between rail and vehicles, pedestrians, and in these communities. So being a binational project, we have obviously participation from Mexico and the U.S. I mean, it doesn't make any sense for only one side of the border to be pushing a project like this. So we have been working very closely with our partners on the Mexican side. So you see there the state of Chihuahua is a sponsor on the Mexican side, and working also with some of the federal agencies, SST, with locally with the city of Ciudad Juarez, the municipio, IMIP, and very importantly, Ferromex, which is the railroad that has the concession to move stuff across Ciudad Juarez. Transconsult is the consultant team that is working for the state of Chihuahua, and obviously we've been doing a lot of coordination with them. And then on the U.S. side, the New Mexico Border Authority, being a state agency, they are the sponsors for the project on the U.S. side. And again, we're having participation with other New Mexico and Texas agencies, federal agencies at the U.S. level as well. Before we get into the project, just a brief explanation of what the binational process is. Anytime you plan a binational project, that involves a port of entry, it's a very lengthy, complicated process. And in this chart, you see 4 phases, phases 1 through 4. Phase 1 generally corresponds to where we are right now, which is feasibility, where you do all the preliminary stuff, making sure that the project is indeed feasible, that there aren't any major fatal flaws. And then in this chart, what you see on the top row in blue is pretty much the process in the U.S. What you see in green on the bottom is a process that you follow typically in Mexico. And in yellow in the middle, that's where throughout the process, you need some action from the two federal governments. Of course, as you move from feasibility to project development and certainly through construction and operations and all that, you are going to need formal actions from the two federal governments. So starting with the project, in this map you see the study area for the project. And again, the idea is to build a rail bypass that would move, this would be for freight rail, to move the existing infrastructure to the west. In other words, starting from the south, if you see there on the south of Juarez in Samalayuca, the idea would be to start the bypass to the west and then heading north, cross into the U.S. somewhere in the vicinity of Santa Teresa, and then ultimately connect to the Union Pacific line that goes to the west and the BNSF line that goes north to Belen. So this is the study area that you see on both sides of the border to the west of the borderplex. And again, the idea, the goals of the study is really for one thing is expedite trade. Second is to eliminate the existing conflicts that we have right now between the communities, and definitely create economic opportunities both in New Mexico and in El Paso on the Texas side. So as part of the work, this map shows the different alternatives that we developed as part of the process. Again, as part of the process, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but once we established the study area, there was a technical committee with a lot of the stakeholders that participated and gave us guidance on where the study was or should go. So we came up as a team in coordination also with our counterparts in Chihuahua with 8 alternatives that you see there in different colors of the bypass. In every case, the bypass starts going from south to north, somewhere in the vicinity of Samalayuca, south of Ciudad Juarez, and then moving to the west, crossing the border at some point, and then, again, like I said before, reconnecting to the UP line, the Sunset line that goes to the west, and then continuing and reconnecting to the line that goes north. So working together, we came up with a universe of 8 alternatives. We did a fatal flaw analysis. So from 8 alternatives, we went to 3. 3 were analyzed with more detail using this criteria. Again, operations, mobility, safety, environmental impacts, engineering, looking at the feasibility for building it and ease of construction, and also consistency with the regional plans on both sides. And definitely looking at the right-of-way acquisition needs and cost. So from 8, we went to 3 to 1 preferred or recommended alternative, which is what you see in this map. What is important, again, these are conceptual alignments. We really haven't done a lot of more detailed engineering, which will be done in following phases. But what is very significant is that the location of the proposed port of entry is very important to identify it now. Because again, from that point, all the engineering and the project development goes both north and south. These are separate processes on the Mexican side and on the U.S. side, but again, we have to work very closely together, making sure that the project moves consistently on both sides. So there you see the recommended alignment, both on the Chihuahua side and also on the New Mexico side. These are just some of the key characteristics of the alignment on the Chihuahua side. We're talking about 36 miles between the border and the point where it connects in Samalayuca. And then on the New Mexico side, we're looking at 25 miles. What is important here is that even though we haven't done a lot of detailed operational analysis and all that, but in the early conversations that we had with the railroads, one of the things, both Union Pacific and BNSF, they said, well, in order for us really to look at this, the starting point is that we need to have something similar to what we have today. And today, you have one line coming in from Juarez, and just south of the border, just before you cross the river, it splits into two. So we have two bridges over the river, one going into the BNSF yard at Chihuahuita, and the other one going into the Union Pacific International yard. So that same concept would be moved to the west, where you have one line, and then each of the railroads would have their own separate tracks, right? So we would have parallel tracks going north from the border, and then the UP track obviously would connect to the existing UP line, and then BNSF would go over, and then connecting to the line that goes north to Belen. We're looking at an estimated construction cost of about $471 million. I mean, it's a pretty expensive. A lot of it is because of the terrain that we need to negotiate as we're crossing the mesa and into the valley in the vicinity of Vado and Berino. So after we completed the feasibility study, the conclusion is that yes, the project is feasible. We really didn't find any major fatal flaws, but that doesn't mean that the project is going to be easy. I mean, we've got two key challenges. One of them is really the cost and finding the appropriate funding and financing sources to get this done. And the other thing that we also found as we were doing the public involvement process, which is very important for a project like this, we had a series of public meetings, and so in the last round of public meetings, we identified a group of property owners that got organized pretty well, and they really expressed their opposition to the project and all that, which is as expected. In any project where you are considering the acquisition of right-of-way and all that, you're obviously going to have some groups that are not totally in favor. So, but again, the good thing of identifying all of these important challenges in the feasibility study gives us a lot of time to bring them on board, start the conversations, and really understand what the concerns are to get the project moving forward. So as a result of the comments that we obtained from the property owners, again, the biggest complaint was that we were taking, that the project proposes to acquire properties in the valley, which are agricultural mostly. So in response to those comments, the New Mexico Border Authority requested that we take a look at another possibility if there were any other alignments that would not require the acquisition of agricultural properties. So we went back to the drawing board and really came up with this map that summarizes the challenges. This is a much bigger area right now. I don't know if you can see in your screens. The alignment that we identified roughly for this analysis is what you see here in green. And if you don't, if the idea is not to acquire any agricultural property, so you can't, there's really no way of going or reconnecting to the line in this area. So the only feasible thing is to continue going north and then farther west, and then connecting in this area to an existing line, and eventually reconnecting to the line that goes to Belen all the way up to Rincon. So more than a bypass, this is a much longer route, but that's the only feasible alternative that does not require the acquisition of agricultural properties. So we did that analysis. It's part of our feasibility study, and it's part of the documentation that is going to be used in subsequent phases of the project. So what are the next steps? A very important step as we move forward is executing an MOU, a memorandum of understanding that relates specifically to the location of the port of entry. Again, and this is something that would be executed between the states of New Mexico and Chihuahua and the 3 railroads. And the whole idea here is, because that is such a critical point to determine as we move forward. But it's going to be the first test to bring the 3 railroads together. Just sit all 3 railroads in the same room and same table is always a challenge, as you very well know. And then the next step is to get the diplomatic notes between the U.S. and Mexico that are required now that we completed the feasibility stage, and we're in the process of doing that. And then moving forward with specifically, the next phase is what we're calling the presidential permit phase, which is to do all the work that is required in order for the sponsor of the project to submit a presidential permit application to the U.S. Department of State. Anytime that you build or that you propose to build a new port of entry, anytime that you pierce the border, you are required to submit an application that documents your project and everything from a formal NEPA document, environmental document with more detailed engineering, a full-blown project development plan, which obviously includes a financial element. How are you going to fund it? Who's going to do what? And which is one of the most interesting things about this project, because it's the initiative really is coming from the public sector. In this case, the Border Authority and the state of New Mexico are the ones that are sponsoring the project, but the users are private companies, the railroads. So it is very interesting in the mix that we have here in this project. So the next big phase would be to complete the presidential permit application, submit it to the State Department, and work with them as they process the application and hopefully obtain a presidential permit. So with that, that's pretty much what we have on the feasibility study. Happy to answer any questions.
Have you identified any sources of funding for this project? Because it's a pretty big price tag. Yeah, no, definitely. It's going to be a combination of sources. There isn't a single source. Federal funding clearly will be a very important source, but we need to find very creative ways of finding funding and financing mechanisms for this. It is important also to note that on the Texas side, imagine if the BNSF yard from the Chihuahuita yard is relocated, that opens up some opportunities there for redevelopment also within the city here in the downtown area. So in addition to resolving a lot of the conflicts that we have today, safety and quality of life stuff and all that, there are some interesting redevelopment opportunities. So clearly it's going to be a complicated funding mix, combination of public, private funding sources that we need to identify as we move forward. Well, I can tell you from my personal experience, it's great to see this study, because this particular concept has been discussed for about 15 years, especially to eliminate the international trains from going right through the middle of downtown Juarez. So there's some huge concern, and I know they're limited hours of operation right now
Right.
for safety considerations that would not be imposed if they were to move it out. So
Exactly right. So right now, with the construction of some overpasses on the Juarez side, the window of operation has been increased to 18 hours a day. But especially Ferromex, the Mexican railroad, I think they understand that even if they achieve a 24-hour window, the capacity, the infrastructure is so limited that they will not be able to take advantage of all the increased traffic that's going to be coming in from Mexico. That's the other very important thing, that as you look at the changes in global trade, a lot of stuff, manufacturing, is coming back to Mexico, and it's going to be coming into the U.S. as the ultimate destination. So rail is going to play a very important role in all of that. So it's important to position this region to have a very efficient and modern rail crossing to expedite the movement of trains back and forth.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Niemer?
One question. You mentioned that BNSF and Union Pacific require their own bridge crossing the border. And I was really struck by that. That seems crazy. Why is that?
Well, again, BNSF and UP are competitors. Sometimes they are forced to play in the same sandbox, but they don't like that. You know, they have trackage rights. You know, but they really don't like, you know, BNSF trains to be running on UP tracks.
And who's paying for the bridge?
Well, these are not bridges, because
crossing. You're right.
Well,
yeah.
crossings, right? So that really simplifies the whole thing. But
Right.
but I think for them, and again, you know, this is the starting point of the feasibility study. But I think it would have been a deal breaker for the railroads if we told them, no, you're going to have to share. I said, well, that's not what we have today. So the assumption for that we started from on the feasibility study, one of the many assumptions was that they were going to have their own tracks. What is really interesting, and I forgot to mention, is that one of the key stakeholders and participants in the study was also the Homeland Security. CBP, Customs and Border Protection, and the Border Patrol. Ray Provencia, who's the chief of the Santa Teresa Port of Entry, amazing. You know, he was very open and gave us a lot of really good ideas. So yes, even if we have, you know, separate tracks for UP and BNSF, but the whole idea, we would, you know, design the facilities so that, you know, CBP would have the ability to go to one track or the other. In other words, have them in the middle as you have, you know, two tracks going forward. And what is also really exciting is a new concept that is being developed or talked about by the railroads, which is a binational rail yard. So instead of having yards on the U.S. side and yards on the Mexican side and have trains, you know, having to stop twice, why not come up with a binational yard where you would have CBP and aduanas doing their thing, you know, immigration on the U.S. side and on the Mexican side, USDA and the counterparts, but all in one single yard, so it's like a one-stop shop. And so, you know, that would be amazing. And one of the really good things about Santa Teresa is because, again, it's in that area west of the existing port of entry, you have all the land. I mean, there's nothing out there, so you have all the land availability. It's flat. You don't have to deal with the river, so it's great. I mean, as a pilot program, that would be amazing.
Mr. Chairman, what's your likely timeline? Likely,
well, as soon as we get started, we're looking at anywhere between, to complete the presidential permit phase, we're looking anywhere between 3 to 5 years. The environmental document, the NEPA document, you know, we're expecting for the federal authorities to require an EIS, an environmental impact statement, and that in itself can take about 3 years. But as we start the formal conversations with them, we're hoping that by showing them what we did in the feasibility study, perhaps instead of doing an EIS, we can do an environmental assessment, which is takes less time to do. But that would be more or less a time frame, somewhere between 3 to 5 years.
And then the construction time?
Construction, I would say it would take about a year and a half or so. I mean, once you start the construction phase, meaning you already have all your funding and agreements and everything in line, the flat part is a no-brainer. I mean, it's all flat. The difficult part is, like I was saying before, when you have to negotiate the mesa, there's a lot of structure. There's a lot of complicated stuff to build. But again, as engineers, we can design, we can build anything. It's only money, right?
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Mr. Calwell, thank you, and Mayor Matisse for being here today. It's a great time. I wish you the best, and I'm not going to speak for the entire board, but I think we could support an initiative like this because I think it's very important for the future of our communities.
And certainly, Mayor, if I may, Mr. Chair, the RMA we see would play a very, very important role in this because, again, it's taking advantage of what's going on in Texas and New Mexico, and the RMA certainly has a lot of abilities to help us with a project this complicated.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Tays, we're going to move to item 5, which is discussion and action on the following instruments as they relate to the procurement for construction of the Old Waco Tanks Road project. Item A is the board resolution to award the project to the lowest responsible bidder and authorize the executive director to negotiate and execute a construction contract with such bidder. Item B is work authorization number 27.3 with Adkins North America Incorporated for construction engineering and inspection services. And item C, amendment to VRF project development agreement with the County of El Paso for construction funding.
Thank you. So as you read into the record, this item deals specifically with the procurement for construction activities associated with the Old Waco Tanks Road project. And you'll recognize the format and the process that we're utilizing here. This follows the exact same thing we've done for Rojas 2 weeks ago, East Lake 2 4 weeks ago, and I can't remember the other one, but we've done another one recently. So you should be hopefully familiar with this process. Essentially what you'll receive today is a PowerPoint presentation describing the scope of the project, the bids received, and that sort of thing from David Head, who's part of our general engineering consultant. Then he'll kick it over to me with requested board action, and I'll walk you through items A, B, and C at that point. So with that, Mr. Head, please.
Good morning. David Head with Atkins North America. I'm working as the general engineering consultant for the CRRMA, and I will be presenting the letting results for the Old Waco Tanks Road project. Much awaited, I think. The agenda, I'll talk about the purpose, location, scope. We'll talk about a little bit about the timeline. Then we'll get into the bids received and the requested board action. So the project purpose, you've seen several of these now, and so it should be fairly familiar to you, but this road project is one that was with the 2013 El Paso County Comprehensive Mobility Plan projects, and it was to be let in 2016, which we did accomplish that. The project budget comes from the El Paso County Vehicle Registration Fee bond proceeds, and there is state and federal funds in there also. This is a joint developed project, so TxDOT did the design of the plans, specs, and estimate, and then Socorro provided the right-of-way, and the RMA is to do the managed construction, inspection and testing, those things. TxDOT's completed designs were advertised and let per the board direction, and the RMA now seeks to award the contract and manage construction. So with that, you've seen this location map several times. You'll probably see it a few more, but it's Project 10 on the map, the Old Waco Tanks Road project. And if you're familiar with the east side, we'll drill down a little bit, and it's south of I-10, and it's north of North Loop. It's over there by East Lake Boulevard project, some other projects that we have that are going to be going on in that same area. And one interesting note, Old Waco Tanks Road, that's probably the last time you will see it, because in the construction plans, the road will be renamed East Lake Boulevard, as done in the plans and requested by Socorro, I believe. So what we're going to be building out there is a 4-lane divided roadway with raised median. There's 6-foot bike lanes. There's curb and four 12-foot lanes, so and illumination. I believe there's some a little bit of landscaping on there also. But this is what the project should look like when we're done with it. And so the role of TxDOT under the project scope was to do the completed design plans and do the design services during construction. So if there's any change orders or anything, that they would be doing those. The role of the county would be to provide the construction funding for the project and then provide owner decisions, guidance, those things for the project issues that may come up during construction. And the role of the RMA is to prepare and let the project for construction bids, and then we would provide the construction management services, oversight, engineering, testing, inspection, those things to complete the project. So the procurement timeline, back in May, the board authorized this project to be advertised for bid, and we did advertise that July 31st. And then the bids were opened August 25th of 2016. So with that, September 14th today, we'll be proposing that the board awards the project, authorizes the executive director to begin the negotiations, and to issue a notice to proceed. The construction timeline is that the contractor could possibly start fairly soon. I would think that it maybe be November, early November or late October. There's 240 days to complete this project, which is approximately 12 months, and it's based on a 5-day work week. The contractor would be out there 5 days a week, and the weather days that would be in there also. If there was bad weather, he would get credit for that. The possible completion would be probably late 2017, early 2018. 12 months. So these are the bid results for that. The lowest responsible bidder is International Eagle Enterprises at $7.5 million, or $7,520,127.90. And as you can see, the grouping on the rest of them is fairly tight in there. I think that we had a good show of bidders, and I believe that we got a good price for it. The engineer's probable cost of construction is $9.7 million, and so it did come in a lot cheaper than what was forecast. So I'll turn over the board action to Raymond.
Thank you. So as you see on the screen before you, we're really looking for 2 action items here. A motion to select International Eagle Enterprises as the lowest responsible bidder for the Old Waco Tanks Road project, and also to authorize the executive director to negotiate and execute a contract with International Eagle Enterprises as the lowest responsible bidder for this particular project. So this, what you see there is actually the requested action item for item 5A specifically. And if you'll allow me, I'll go through items 5B and C as well while we're here. So 5A then seeks to award the construction contract and authorize me to negotiate and execute the agreement once we've gone through that process. Item B then would be to authorize the executive director to execute work authorization 27.3 with our general engineering consultant for construction engineering and inspection services. This is exactly how we've done the prior ones as well. What you'll notice that is a little bit unique in this item number 5 as opposed to the prior procurements that we've done is that because TxDOT completed the design services for this particular project, there isn't a subpart here asking for additional agreement and funding for design services during construction, where we normally have a local engineering firm doing that for us. So that's why that one is missing. But we still require our engineers to do the oversight, our general engineering consultant team to do the oversight of the construction. So that's what item B is there. And item C, then you will recognize this one. This is the amendment with the County of El Paso, which actually authorizes and provides access to the RMA of the construction funds that are being used for this particular project. Now, as Mr. Head mentioned, this is a jointly funded project. The majority of the funds are actually coming from the federal government through TxDOT, as awarded by the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So there is the brunt of the funding for this particular project comes through TxDOT. However, there is additional funding being provided by the county, which is why we have item C there to amend the interlocal that we had previously signed with the County of El Paso. So subject to your questions, I would recommend approval of all three items 5A, B, and C.
Can we do them under one motion, Mr.
Yes,
Tejas?
yes, sir.
Okay. Ms. Hiner?
Couple of questions. Not sure if this is on. You mentioned about maybe landscaping of the median. Can you tell me if in fact landscaping is proposed for the project?
I don't remember at this point what it would be. I'd have to go back and look, but I think there was some landscaping in it, I believe.
Is there anybody who can answer that question, Mr. Tejas, here today?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. I apologize, but we can get that answer to you right after the board meeting.
And then has the RMA awarded, I've never heard of International Eagle Enterprises. Did they go through the pre-clearance, and just not a company I'm familiar with?
Yes, so the board discussed this organization last
You missed
board
the fun.
Oh, well, that's what I get for not showing up.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, they went through the pre-qualification process, and if you recall, there are two TxDOT pre-qualification processes. One is called the bidder questionnaire, the other one, which is a little more in-depth, which is called the confidential questionnaire. This organization has gone through the confidential questionnaire, so they have been, we went through all the approvals and they have met all of the requirements.
This is the first time, though, that we've...
The first time we've used them, yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
And I'm assuming y'all have more information. Okay, thank you.
yes, ma'am.
Through the chair, and I guess I'll address this to Mr. Head, or Mr. Tejas. And this regards the engineering oversight, because you've got a number of about $1 million to provide engineering oversight on a $7.5 million project. And I'm just trying to get my head around that. That's about 15% of the project, and I know every project's different, but could you expand on the services that Atkins will be providing on this project?
Sure. We'll be doing the inspection part, so there will be multiple inspectors out there. Then the project management of the services there. So there's a lot of record keeping that goes on with federal projects. We'll be working with TxDOT to make sure that we have their records complete and on time, those sorts of things. There's a lot of testing that goes on in this. The testing, there's a lot of concrete paving that was to be done on this, so that kind of pushed the price up a little bit. But we certainly will only use what we need, and so if there's leftover funds, then they go back to the county or to TxDOT, whichever way it goes. But that was our best estimate at the time that the plans were prepared, and so I think it was at 10% when we first prepared those numbers, and so once the bids came in, the scope did not go down. It's just that some of these smaller projects, they do take quite a bit of the same time and effort as a bigger project. So on the bigger projects, you do see a lot less percentage of engineering that goes on. It's just kind of relative. Same records, same people that's got to be out there. It just drives the price up a little bit.
Okay, so this is a not to exceed?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. All of our work authorizations are not to exceed amounts, and with few, if any, exceptions, I can't recall of any off the top of my head. They always come in under. I should mention also that the scope itself is outlined within item 5B of the backup, and you can go through some of that. But I think if you'd like, please let me know. We can set up a meeting. We can walk through the actual day-to-day type of activities that what this actually consists of. But beyond that, I'd also mention that the county has reviewed this and is comfortable with the scope as well. Same scope that we utilized for all the other prior agreements as well. Okay. Thank you.
If there's no further questions, I'll entertain a motion to approve item 5, A, B, and C.
So moved.
Second.
There being no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Head. Mr. Tejas, I seem to have a small technical snafu on my screen here, so I think I closed an item improperly. I'd like to be able to activate so I can get the PowerPoint again.
We'll get IT up here, but in the meantime, there's item 6 for reading the record.
Item 6. No, I've got the agenda. I just don't have the ability to look at the PowerPoint on my screen
Oh, okay.
going forward. I can do that. Okay, item 6 is discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the following change orders to the construction contract with Paso del Norte Track Works as they relate to the El Paso streetcar project. Item A is change order number 4, various additive and deductive change orders required to support the relocation of various utility lines. And item B, change order number 5, additional work and coordination required to support the relocation of various telecommunication lines. Mr. Tejas?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So for this particular item, I thought what we would do, and we're following the process that we used for the last grouping of change orders for the streetcar project. Today we have with us Gil Gardner, who is the project manager for us out of our general engineering consultant team. He's going to provide a presentation to you outlining what the change orders are, and then he'll kick it over to me for the action items under item 6, which includes the resolution for change orders number 4 and 5. So with that, Mr. Gardner.
Good morning. I'm Gil Gardner with Atkins, and as you know, you've seen me before. I'm the project manager and construction manager for the El Paso streetcar. If you recall, a few months ago, we were up here and we had 3 change orders, change orders 1, 2, and 3. We now have change orders number 4 and number 5, which is that we want to present today, and I'll be using the same procedure, and I have some photographs to show you. The agenda is change order number 4, which is kind of a cleanup change order for the utility work, and as he said, then change order number 5 is one we require to accommodate the communications lines, and then we'll have a change order summary and then any questions. Change order number 4 consists of the resolution of several issues across the project's 3 base bids and includes both additive and deductive changes to the contract price. Under the base bid 1, which is the main contract work that is covered by our $97 million agreement, we had some redesign of the foundation pedestals and the 6-inch topping at the maintenance facility site, and it's at the pit where the vehicle will be over it. And there were some unforeseen conditions as they got down there and had to do some redesign. Placement of geogrid on Kansas Street. When they got ready to start placing the pad and the track work, they recognized that the existing subgrade was in very poor condition, so we had to place a geogrid on there. Also included support for coordination with El Paso Electric and all the work that El Paso Electric is doing within the quarter, and then the impacts to the El Paso Electric facilities, the impacts on the utility work along the corridor. And then the existing traffic signal and pothole operation where we had a deductive change order. Under base bid 2, which is for the El Paso water utility work, if you recall, that's a separate, we keep that as a separate one. We had some differing site conditions at Oregon Street and Rim Road. Plus we had the Kansas water line construction. And if you recall, that is the one on Kansas between Myrtle and San Antonio, which was expected to be about a 19-day construction thing, and it ended up being closer to 90 days, primarily because of all of the existing utilities, old foundations, historical items and stuff. So there was a significant amount of additional work they had to do. Under base bid 3, on the sanitary sewer work, for El Paso Water and Sanitary, we had some changes on base bid 3, which we'll go over. The cumulative effect of this change order of all of the various items to the project budget is $218,697.87. A breakdown of that, just to show you, I told you we discussed the Kansas water line. Like I said, it was a fairly significant cost, but we also had some bid items that we were going to underrun, so we were able to use the underrun on those bid items to essentially pay for that additional subsurface work, and we ended up with a credit of $310.91. The foundation pedestals and slab under the MSF site, if you recall, the first 3 change orders were also related to the maintenance and facility. This was about a $10,000 change where the contractor had to go in and change some details and add a concrete slab cover on the footing. For the sanitary sewer, there were a significant number of changes when they got out in the field and they discovered that they couldn't run the sanitary sewer in exactly the order the design had called for because underground utilities were in the way or whatever. Working with the El Paso water utilities, their inspector, their team, we developed workarounds on that, and through force account we're able to keep the project going. The change on that is $97,407. On the Kansas City geogrid, that's when they went out there and they discovered that they just could not get the compaction because of the soils. There were just too much silts in the soils, and they were pumping. The solution was to install a geogrid and allowed them then to get the compaction and pair the slab, place the slab, the track slab. And in addition, if you're out there looking, I drove by there on the way in this morning, the concrete pavement on Kansas is now placed, and it really looks nice. They're still in the process of putting the curb and gutter and sidewalk in, but they had to put the geogrid before they could place that concrete pavement. The El Paso electric support included a lot of things, and a little background on the El Paso electric on the utilities. When this project was awarded, it was awarded or the bids were opened in August last year. It was awarded in October of last year. It was awarded based upon the fact that the contractor could not start until the first of the year, and that all of the third-party utilities, the private utilities, would be relocated during that time. As it turns out, the third-party utilities, the only one that got relocated from the October through December time period was Texas Gas. All of the rest of it did not start doing work until in January and February. And in fact, El Paso Electric is currently installing some conduits and boxes and manholes on Oregon. So what the contractors had to do is to run into a lot of these, and then there have been changes that the El Paso Electric created on the utility work, that rather than charging the utility lines, we charged it to the main line support on that, so we could just keep a better budget thing. And that's the major one of $359,000. We had some differing site conditions at Oregon and RIM, which was fairly small, but it was about a $5,000 change. And then we had a credit, and the last one is a traffic signal pothole. The initial design, the assumption had been made that we would have to go in and relocate all of the traffic signal conduits because they would be too shallow. What we did is we went in and potholed all of the areas and discovered that the traffic signal conduits were all deep enough that we did not have to relocate a great number of those conduits. So in doing so, it managed to save us a significant amount of money, which was $263,000, almost $264,000. So that gave us a total change order of $218,000. Some of the photos of look this, you can see the size. This is the sewer system. We had to snake these sewer pipelines in under the existing utilities, and it did increase that. The differing site conditions were up at Oregon, where we had some pumping and utility ways, and like I said, it was a small amount, but we had to incorporate that. This is a picture of the Kansas water line here. That's what we ended up with, and all of that work had to be done by hand digging instead of using equipment. Hydroplaning, we had to stop at times so we could figure out which utilities were which, who they belonged to. We even found, if you recall, there was a piece of an old foundation of a very, we assumed it was the City Hall foundation, which we had to have mapped, then gently taken out and set onto the side so it could be used or someone else could salvage it. And then the Kansas geogrid in there is where we had to come in and place a geogrid so we could then come and replace the pavement. This is just a picture of that, and this is where we had the foundation pedals and stuff. That's the maintenance facility, and it's further along than that now, but that was in the pit inside the building itself, and that's just a picture of it. And then in the traffic signal potholing, what we saved by doing that, we saved having to do a lot of work like this where we'd had to gone in and relocate a lot of those traffic signal or the conduits. Change order number 5 is, includes various route design changes on several locations of the upper loop, primarily along Stanton, and to reduce the number and severity of the telecommunication line relocations required. And by reducing the number of these line relocations, we were able to, or have been able to, reduce the additional cost and time otherwise required for the activities, because we would RMA is responsible for the relocation of any telecommunications utilities. The 5 is split into 4 categories. We ended up, our contractor is going to be doing some conduit and manhole installation for AT&T. We're also going to be installing casings for the future use by AT&T so they come in, or when they are ready to come in and replace their existing conduits. Then we also are having to provide existing duct bank protection as our line. The ducts are sometimes fairly shallow, so we have to protect the ducts to make certain that they're not destroyed or broken. And the duct bank protection as we do our paving and install our track. And then support of the coordination of all the line relocations and modifications required by the contractor. The cumulative effect of this change order to the project budget is $1,300,766.99. There's a sample of some of the work. It's a little bit difficult for you to see on the screen. I think you guys can see it a little better, but basically AT&T had come up with proposed designs to replace all of their existing lines where they were impacted by the construction of the streetcar system. There's no way that we could have afforded to pay for all of those, so we worked closely with AT&T, and I want to emphasize that. We worked very closely with them to develop workarounds, and such that we did not have to expend a significant amount of money, and far more than this change order. And in doing so, what we agreed to do was to put in the sleeves, and that's what we're doing, and that will accommodate AT&T's future conduit relocation, and they will be doing it because some of these conduits are pretty old. This is one here on Oregon Street where we have agreed the conduit does need to be replaced because it's directly under our track slab. So, and we couldn't relocate the track slab here, so where our contractor's actually placing the conduit in the manholes and putting in the cable. Then AT&T will come back in and they will make the connections, and the splicing and everything, and they'll have a new conduit or new system in there. So the impact of the schedule on 4 or 5, they both can be completed within the current schedule that we've got. They are somewhat dependent upon third-party activities, and that is El Paso Electric completing their work, which they're in the process of doing. They're actually running a little ahead of time. And then AT&T being able to provide us the materials, because we have to use AT&T materials. They can provide us the materials such that we can do the work for them. Change order and activities, in order to keep on schedule, they have to begin within this month. So the contractor can keep on schedule with his track work. On the impact on the budget, under change order number 4 was $218,000. We have a contingency for the base bids of over $4 million left, and we're quite a ways through. We're almost finished with the underground, so we're in very good shape. Change order number 5 is $1,300,766.99. We have a communications and an electrical service budget of $3,800,000 that we've used to pay for this, that we'll use to accommodate this, and that was part of the budget for the telecommunications. So the project remains within budget and remains on schedule. So with that, any questions?
No, don't apologize, Ms. Emanuel.
I have a few questions related to the change order number 5. You kind of started by saying we're reducing the number of locations and compressing time and expense, but then you gave us a $1.3 million change order. So I'm kind of not understanding that part of it. It doesn't sound like those are unforeseen conditions. It sounds like they should have been line items in the original bid. What am I missing here?
Sure, I can address that. So the original plan was for the placement of the track, and specifically, I think the best example of this is along Stanton Street, heading from Schuster up to Cincinnati. The original plans called for the track to be laid to the on the right-hand side, the northbound right-hand side of the roadway, but that's where an AT&T line currently exists. So that would have required significant relocation activities and significant cost and time. So what you're seeing here is actually us, through what Gil was referring to as the close coordination with AT&T, was a coordination to figure out how can we achieve the goal of getting the streetcar up Stanton and also reducing the impact to AT&T's lines. So we've shifted the alignment over to the center of the roadway, thereby leaving AT&T intact. So while you're correct, if we had originally had the alignment in the center of the roadway, then all of this would have been line itemed and it all would have been fine, but we had a different plan in place. So we've gone back since and realigned it. So I hope, does that...
So we had an expenditure to do it one way, and this is a more expensive way to do it?
A less expensive. It's actually much less, significantly less expensive way. And it saves time as well, which is important.
So the bid never included the cost for the original alignment, is what I'm hearing. And so this is... What did we have estimated for the original alignment? It just seems to me it should be a deductive change order instead of a change order if we had it in the bid. Right. It sounds like we didn't have it.
Under the original alignment, the actual cost of construction was about the same. These impacts on the AT&T is putting in the sleeves, putting in the conduit. That was never part of the original contract. It also includes the coordination and some of the changes that we had to go through in order to, did increase the contract a little, but in order to accommodate AT&T. If I showed you the drawings on AT&T, and they presented us a full set of drawings, the assumption being that they would have to relocate the line under Stanton, for instance, as an example, is about 3,400 lineal feet, and it's a 24 to 30 number of conduits. So it's a major line, and the total cost of doing all of the AT&T replacements would have been in the order of about $8 million. And we had a budget of $3 million for all of the telecommunications, not just the AT&T. So that's why we had to go back and work. A combination of doing some realignment and then working with AT&T and such that we were able to show them that they didn't have to replace all of the lines at this time down in the lower, down in the downtown area. We didn't have to replace a line. We could protect the lines and then put a sleeve in, and it was in negotiations. The next item is a discussion on the negotiations, but even though we're increasing the contractor's price by $1.3 million, we're actually saving the construction a significant amount of money because we only had $3 million budget, and we had to stay within that $3 million. And and the other thing, when the original budget was initially set, they did not quite realize that RMA would be responsible for paying for the relocation of all telecommunications. That came afterwards. So the budget that was there was normal relocation cost, and the new state regulations are.
So that was never factored in the bid.
Well, let me,
You know I'm
yeah,
gonna
so
ask
let's
that
go
next.
into that, right? Because that is a gray area still, and I'm not 100% certain that regional mobility authorities are actually 100% responsible for relocation of telecommunication costs. But going back in time, originally, you may recall, telecommunications providers had franchises through the municipalities. Several years back, they lobbied and were approved by the legislature to move that to a statewide franchise. And when that happened, then all of the normal authority that a municipality has to tell a utility that we've got this project coming in, you've got to move and bear those costs, all of that went away. But there in my opinion, in my mind, there is a gray area in terms of when an RMA comes in under the auspices of a municipality, and who is responsible for those telecommunications costs. Now, what we've done though is that we've coordinated with TxDOT to reduce the amount of impact overall significantly. So there's a lesser impact, and to expedite the project and to keep us on track and on budget and on schedule, we've agreed to pay for these costs. Not in other words, we're not saying that we agree that we have to. We're saying in order for the benefit of the public and keep it on track, we're going to.
I'm sorry, I'm going to continue on this vein because I'm
No,
interested.
go right ahead.
So utilities have a franchise, and they installed these lines originally under their franchise agreement. I understand the law changed in 2 years, and that it would seem to apply to any new infrastructure that's put in under the state franchise, but any existing lines would be under the city, the old franchise agreement, which this is a city project. Mm-hmm. And generally, those franchise agreements say, move your line. You're here as we're accommodating you, but the public purpose is, the form. So I'm a little concerned about paying something if we're not legally required to do it. And do we have an opinion from our attorneys as to where their position is on that?
We have
it's
spent
a lot of money.
Sure, we have spent some time looking at it, and as I mentioned, it's a gray area. Now we could bring in some attorneys to provide that opinion to you. However, what we're trying to do by taking this approach is avoid the time, cost, and effort required to go in basically into a contested situation with a utility and stop the project while we figure out who is absolutely responsible to pay for it. Now again, going back to the beginning of the project, we budgeted a certain amount for utility activities, and we're right in that area to cover this approach. So that's why I'm recommending that we move forward with it, because it is within the budgeted amount that we set aside for it, and it resolves it in, I think, the best way for both parties.
Okay, well, let me think about it a little bit. And I have another question regarding the base bid 2 change order. That's work that the RMA is taking on for the PSB, is that correct?
Correct.
Is the PSB contributing funds for that base bid, or are those coming from the RMA funds?
They provided a set amount, and you may recall there was some back and forth between the RMA and the Water Utility Board at that time. They agreed to a certain set amount, and anything above that we are covering. So it's coming out, this change order is coming from the TxDOT $97 million.
Okay, where are we in terms of completion of the project? I mean, what percentage is complete? And
we're about 35% complete. for the overall project at this time. However, we're about 85% complete of the underground work, and that is the one where the greatest uncertainties are. What we have to do now is to put the track in, and then put the substations and the OCS, and we know how much that'll be. So the contingency required for that is not a very high percentage. So we're pretty comfortable on the remaining contingency we have left.
So
we're not pretty.
We won't
we're
be
very
having a lot more of these. is what you're
Huh?
telling me. We won't be having a lot more of these in future meetings of these changes.
Right. We will. There will be another change order coming up in October. That'll be kind of a cleanup change order. At that time, I'll work. What I'll do is I'll work with Raymond, and I'll kind of give you a look ahead, if you want to call it, of where we would expect any further work and any further change orders.
I appreciate that. Obviously, we have a set budget. We don't have.
Right.
We can't get money somewhere else. I'm very hesitant to approve anything where I don't feel like maybe we're 100% required to do so. Let me ask you a follow-up question to the utility location. Is there a way we can pay this without, it kind of say it's still in dispute, but we're going to pay it to move the project forward and continue to work with them on the resolution of this, Raymond? Or do you see that?
That's exactly what we're doing. We the letter agreements that I provided as backup, in no place within those letter agreements do they state that we are required to pay these by statute or rule or otherwise. So that's exactly what we're doing. We're paying this to make to allow the project to continue. And again, it's within the budgeted amount that we set aside for telecommunications.
But are we going to take steps to try to prove a point that we're not required to pay and get a reimbursement of it, or is it just basically a settlement of a claim, and there's no?
It's analogous to a settlement.
Okay.
Now, if I could touch on Gil's last point, it's really important to note that the majority of our contingency plan, our active contingency management plan, front-loaded a bunch of contingency, the majority of our budget into the underground utility work. We're 85%. I thought it was a little bit further, but
it actually is a little further. I'm just being conservative.
Good.
Okay, yeah, and that's probably best. It's probably
Yeah,
best.
I
But
appreciate that.
so I think the point that you should come away from this with is that we are through the most harrowing part of the project, which is digging up dirt and looking for things underground and finding things that you didn't know were going to be there. Now, there will continue to be change orders throughout the rest of the project. So I don't want anybody to think that we're done with change orders, and especially beyond the one that we come back to you for in October. We will have change orders throughout the entire project. All projects have them. It's just a matter of when we do them and how we roll them out. But remember, too, when we presented this project to you all and got authority to pursue it, we developed a very active contingency management plan, and we've been utilizing that since day one. So we're in a very perhaps comfortable spot is maybe not the right word, but in terms of where the contingency funds have been used, I'm very comfortable in how they have been used, and in particular, these change orders do not change that in any way.
Okay, I have one last question. That's okay. The RMA is in charge of building this project for the city, so we have agreements with the city of how we're going to manage it and how we're going to construct it. Is there any concern with the expenditure of this $1.3 million that the city would say, we didn't agree with you settling this and we're not going to pay this? Are they on board on this, and do we have something in writing in terms of this not coming back? I mean, the RMA doesn't want to be left holding $1.3 million.
So the funds, remember, the funds come from TxDOT. They do not come from the city. So the city has no say in how the $97 million are expended. Now, that's contractually, right? Now, obviously, this is their project. We're developing it on their behalf. So they've been involved in every step of this along the way. So they know exactly what we're talking about in terms of the alignment. We've met with their traffic division, their public works director, their streets department, their bicycle folks, any and everybody that would be involved with this realignment and everything associated with it has been involved, and they've provided their input, and all the way up to the city manager, who's been made aware of this as well. So absolutely, they are fully aware and supportive.
City and TxDOT are aware that this is a settlement of a claim, and we're not.
It's not a settlement of a claim. It's analogous to.
That's what I call it. Yeah.
But in essence, it's simply a change order. This is a different approach that we're taking to resolve the potential conflict between the underground utilities and the proposed alignment for the streetcar.
So no concerns with the gift of public funds or any of those legal concepts?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No, absolutely
Okay.
not.
So if the attorneys are comfortable,
So the attorneys have reviewed all of the agreements that you saw as your backup for the agreements with AT&T, the change orders. They review all of this. So absolutely, they're very comfortable with it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Gil? Thank you, Gil.
Thank you. So with that, subject to your questions, I would recommend approval of item 6, which is a resolution that would approve change orders number 4 and number 5.
Mr. Chairman, move to approve.
Second.
If I could ask that those be taken separately, I'd like to vote differently on those.
Okay, I believe we can do that. So would you like to amend your motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve item 6A,
I'll
which
second
is
that.
change order number 4.
I'll second that.
There being no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Okay, so now entertain a motion to approve item 6B.
So moved.
Second.
There being no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against?
I'm against.
Duly noted.
Thank
Commissioner, thank you.
Good.
Item number 7 is discussion and action on board resolutions authorizing the executive director to execute 4 application and letter agreements with AT&T as they relate to the El Paso streetcar project. Mr. Tejas?
Yes, sir. So as this is more of a continuation of the last item than anything else, it's really a request for authorization to execute the 4 letter agreements with AT&T for the implementation of the changes that were referenced by Mr. Gardner. So subject to your questions, I would recommend approval of this item, which is 4 individual resolutions. I believe it's 4 individual resolutions for the executive director to execute the 4 application and letter agreements with AT&T as they relate to the El Paso streetcar project.
Any questions, members of the board?
Motion to approve.
Second.
There being no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against?
In the same vein.
Okay.
So I've recorded Ms. Hinera as a no. Do you want to take that vote again?
Yes,
Mr.
let's take it
Niemer was
again
just
because
out.
Mr. Niemer was out of the room. Mr. Niemer, we had a motion and a second to approve item 7, which was for the executive director to execute 4 application and letter agreements with AT&T as they relate to the El Paso streetcar project. And so if you do not have any questions, I'd like to record your vote for that motion.
I vote to approve.
Thank you. You okay now, Mr. Tejas?
Yes, thank you.
Motion passes. Item 8 is discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute an agreement with Level 3 Communications LLC as it relates to the El Paso streetcar project. Mr. Tejas.
So this item is actually very similar to item number 7, except that it deals with a different telecommunications provider, which is a group by the name of Level 3 Communications. This group has lines that are also in conflict along the route of the streetcar. There are aerial and also underground lines, and you'll note in your backup that was provided the locations of those lines along the majority, if I remember correctly, the majority of these lines are along Father Rom in the downtown area. So this will cover the cost for the relocation of the aerial and underground relocations, and this one is approximately $600,000. And this one is within the budget that we had allocated for telecommunications relocations as well. So subject to your questions, I would recommend approval of this one as well.
Ms. Yenier.
Sure. Mr. Taves, is this company in the right of way through an easement, or is it also a franchise?
This is a telecommunications company, so it's in the same
Same thing.
situation as AT&T.
Okay.
Mr. Niemer?
Yes. I read the letter from Level 3, and I was surprised a little bit at some of the terms. In particular, they're paid in advance, and upon completion, their work is accepted as is with no warranties or representations. Now, since they're relocating their equipment, I presume that that's why they can do a deal as is, and so this is just basically like a settlement. I am troubled, though, that they've given one cost. They state that should other items come up, that the fee will be adjusted up, but there's no language about adjusting it down should the work go below a certain amount. Anyway, can you talk about this? This is...
Let me find that. One moment, please.
Okay, I'm referring to, well, number 3 is where they're paid in advance. Number 4 is accepting it, that the CRRMA accepts the work as is. And number 5 provides for an adjustment up.
Well, I would, if you're interested in, and I honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I know that our attorneys have reviewed this, and I don't remember discussing that item with them.
Right.
What you could do is make a motion to approve, subject to the addition of that additional provision that should actual expenses be less than the amount identified, that those be returned to the Regional Mobility Authority.
I think that'd be a reasonable thing to do.
Can I add to yours? Because I think
sure.
I have the same concerns. For example, the RMA, I believe where the request from this agreement, the terminology is not very consistent, but we're indemnifying them. I mean, here you have a company who's getting paid to move their lines. There shouldn't be any indemnity. There shouldn't be any of this in this type of agreement. You're going to do the work, and we're going to pay you, and that's all on you. So I'm concerned a little bit about the indemnity, and I personally think I'd like to have the attorneys look at this again and maybe table this if we could, because I have a lot of questions about this agreement. It just seems very unusual. This is something where maybe if the RMA was doing the work, I could see the indemnity and some of the other things, but it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, before I send it back to the attorneys, is there a way that I could get each of your issues identified so that I could have them address them individually? I'd hate to go back to the attorneys, have them do what they thought you might want, and then come back and realize it isn't those. We didn't capture everything. Is there a different way to do this, perhaps?
I think those 5 paragraphs, the 4 that you mentioned, and the indemnity are my concern. If we can get an opinion as to why those are warranted or appropriate, I would like to know that. Or, maybe we can, in concept, I understand the concept, and I'm happy to move with the expenditure to not delay the project. But this agreement, I'd like to see it revised.
Okay, and how, though? Sorry.
Well, I don't believe we should indemnify them.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think there should be anything past the one-time payment that's done. I mean, obviously they've done their cost estimate. There shouldn't be an agreement to pay anything above that. I don't really understand the payment up front. I'm willing to let that go, but that seems a little peculiar. And those are my 2 big issues. It just seems like we're in the position of doing the work versus them doing the work. So those 2 are my big ones.
Mr. Tejas, which of our groups reviews this
Locklord.
stuff? Excuse me?
Locklord.
Locklord.
Oh, sorry. So I think.
What happens
let
if we
me
table?
ask-
What happens if we table this?
Right, I was just going to ask that. If I could ask Mr. Gardner to come up and address if we were to push this to the October board meeting.
Or September.
The problem with pushing it to the October board meeting, if you recall on my presentation for the change order, we have agreed to put in some conduits and manholes. This is for AT&T. And we have to use their materials. And they won't release those materials until they have a signed agreement.
We're talking about level 3, though.
Oh, level
specifically.
3.
This is for level
Level
3.
3 we could hold off because they actually won't start doing work until January.
Okay.
So we could hold off for another month.
I'd
So
like
if you'd
make
like
a
to-
motion to table.
Or if you'll delete it, then I can bring it
Okay.
back to address specifically. And I want to make sure I capture everyone's
Well,
issues.
So let me that sort of raises the same issue is we're paying them to relocate their equipment. Can this not be done I guess, is it done as a settlement or this is settlement is probably the wrong word, but we're paying a fee for a right-of-way, basically. Is that correct? This is not a service contract, but it looks like one.
I'm not sure I follow. We are. So maybe let me come at it
Are
from.
these not liquidated damages?
No.
No, I guess it wouldn't be. Okay, well, all right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So let me make sure that I understand what is being requested that we look at. So specifically, we're looking at the removal of the indemnification provision within the Level 3 agreement. We're also looking at
The payment up front.
Well, I understood that one was okay.
Were you okay with that, Ms. Henier, leaving that?
I don't like it, but I'm okay as long as it's the one-time fee. I think you need to remove the agreement to pay anything above that is the one that's a
Well,
problem.
my issue is if their costs are less, then
It just
there's a
seems like-
big trust issue here.
Well, it doesn't seem like anybody's looked at this in terms of what, it should really be, you've asked us to relocate, this is our cost, we agree to pay you. That's really all it should be. It should be a very, I don't want to lawyer here because I'm not the lawyer here, but I'm just concerned this doesn't fit the scenario that we're in. And if we have time, maybe you can communicate to the attorneys that we have just a lot of concerns with the agreements, and then we have time to put it on the agenda a couple of times if we have to get comfortable with it, from what I'm hearing. But
Mr. Tez, I think it would be appropriate, since Ms. Henier is a member of the board, to be involved in that discussion with you, with our attorneys.
Certainly.
I can certainly mark it up and send it to you.
That would be really
Let
helpful.
me, if that's okay, I can mark up what I think and taking what we've talked about and send it to you. And I won't copy the board, but I'll just send it to you. Maybe that'll help.
I'll send you a Word version. I think that would be really helpful.
And I don't think we need to have a motion for that. I mean, that's within the purview of this board.
Absolutely. So I think the motion would be a motion to delete, and then I'll send the Word version to Ms. Henier. We'll get her comments back, and then we'll take it from there.
And I think Mr. Niemer would probably like a little input into that document, since he raised some concerns.
Sure,
No.
I can share.
No? You defer
Oh,
to?
no.
I defer.
All right.
It's all
Okay.
on your show.
So I know we have a motion to delete and a second. There being no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry,
Any
and I
against?
missed that. Could you?
Ms. Henier made the motion to delete. I believe Mr. Parker made the second,
Okay.
and the motion passes.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe that concludes our business. Okay, excuse me. Mr. Parker would like to raise a question.
As I understand it, we're building this, overseeing the building of this for the city of El Paso. Is that correct?
In essence, yes, they will own and operate it.
After it's completed, will the city run this project, or will we run it?
The city of El Paso through its mass transit department, Sun Metro.
Okay. Now, my second question is that we already know that TxDOT is going to rebuild I-10. What will the city do? Are you aware of what the city of El Paso plans to do when TxDOT rebuilds the Oregon and the Kansas Street bridges?
I am not aware of what they have decided, but I do know that the city of El Paso has been talking to TxDOT about that for quite some time. In fact, there is I want to say it's an MUA. I forget exactly what it stands for. I think it's some type of a permit that TxDOT requires of the city in this case before we can place the tracks on the city's behalf. So through those discussions, I know that they've gone back and forth on what the timeline looks like for the proposed reconstruction of I-10 through downtown, and also what Sun Metro's plans will be once those bridges come down. I do understand that I believe that TxDOT would only bring one of them down at a time. Obviously, you can't You can't cut off all access into downtown. But I don't know, and I know that at one point they were talking about potentially putting in some switches so that the streetcar could head up and back down on a single track, whichever bridge was still open. But honestly, I don't know the answer to that, but I can look in to see what they've decided.
I understand. I think it's interesting that we're building something that will be torn out in a relatively near term.
Now, I think as part of those discussions, and I will get confirmation on this, but I think as part of the discussions, TxDOT has agreed to a certain extent to replace those tracks that they remove once the new bridges come in. Now, that's where I kind of dropped out of those conversations, so I didn't see how they resolved that. So I don't know what the end result is, but I know that TxDOT was at least talking about potentially laying new track for them once the new bridges come in. And they're talking about full spans over without any columns being dropped into I-10 because they want to expand and add additional lanes on I-10. So it's a full reconstruction. It'll be fairly significant.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We can hardly wait. I believe that concludes our business today. Would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned at exactly 12 noon.